Hey, friends! Welcome to the Swing My Heart podcast. Come join me, your host, Nicole, for some hope-filled conversations about heartfelt entertainment that makes your heart swing. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Swing My Heart podcast. I'm your host, Nicole, and today I'm so excited to have a very special guest to the podcast, author of Romantic Beach Reads, Savannah Carlisle. Welcome to the podcast, Savannah.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Of course, I'm so excited to chat with you today about your debut novel.
It was a long time coming. It was not the first
Yes.
novel I wrote, and it took a lot of
Oh,
years to finally get to
yes.
one that got published.
Before we get to your debut novel, when did you first know you wanted to be an author? What was the first book you read, and what was the first book you wrote?
Yeah, gosh, I was one of those kids who was always reading something or writing something. I have these like legal pads that I used to sit by my grandparents' pool with in the summer and write these stories like as a
Mhm.
preteen and a teenager. I'll have to go back and read those and see if any of those stories can be revived. But I didn't get serious about it until I was in my 20s. I was a corporate attorney and I actually started writing nonfiction first. I got a nonfiction
Okay.
book deal on legal and business issues in sports, which has now sort of become my career. I left being a corporate
Oh,
attorney to become a
that's
sports
awesome.
business reporter. And um, I got those opportunities to write nonfiction, and I thought it would be so cool to also get to
Mhm.
write a novel. And so I started
Yeah.
playing around with one in my early 20s. I'm now in my early 40s. So we're talking 20 years ago. And that first one I started playing around with, I actually never finished. I think I sent the first
Oh,
half to
wow.
my literary agent who I had gotten for my nonfiction,
Mhm.
and she told me that the male character was completely unlikable. And
Oh,
like
no.
many authors, my first book was based on my real life and was based on a real person. And I was like, what do you mean he's unlikable? I dated
Oh,
him for like
no.
a lot of years.
Oh, no.
So that
Oh.
book will never see the light of day. But I finished a book in 2019, which my agent took out on submission in 2020, that unfortunately died on submission during the
Oh,
pandemic.
no.
But it is getting a second life because it is actually going to be my second book. It's being published in May of 2025. So that was the first one I finished, but it'll be the second one published. And then the second one I finished was what ended up becoming my debut novel, The Library of Second Chances.
Oh, that's awesome.
I know you said first book you read. I wish I could
Yes,
remember.
that's
Um,
okay.
I was just looking at some podcast episodes for somebody
Yeah.
else's podcast today that has on a lot of celebrities and that kind of stuff. And
Mhm.
they had R.L. Stein on. And I thought, oh man, I
Oh,
loved R.L. Stein books when I was a
yeah.
kid. I haven't thought about R.L. Stein. I don't have kids of my own, so I haven't thought
Yeah.
about R.L. Stein books in such a long time, but definitely loved R.L. Stein books growing up. And I loved Lurleen McDaniels, who wrote these incredibly heartbreaking novels where usually it
Mhm.
was two teenagers in love and one of them was sick with cancer or something
Oh,
terrible.
no.
And I have no idea why I was drawn to those books, but she was one of my favorite authors as a teenager.
Oh. I've never heard of that author, but I have, of course, heard of R.L. Stein, and I
Yes,
think I probably did read a couple of those growing up as well for school or just in my free
exactly.
time. Yeah. I think one of my favorite authors is probably Jeanette Oke, who wrote the Canadian West series that the Hallmark show When Calls the Heart is based off of.
Yes, love the show, but I've actually never read the books. Maybe I should go back and read them now.
Yes, the books are great, and there's actually 2 series. So there's the Canadian West series, and then there's the Return to the Canadian West series, and that series
Okay.
is the one that the show is based off of. Yeah.
I'm getting ready to head out west next week to get a little fall weather out in Colorado. So that sounds like the perfect time to start those.
You should. Yes, they're great. She's a fantastic author. Who are some of your favorite authors, and how have they inspired your writing?
Oh, so one of my favorite authors is Jenny Hale, who writes
Yes.
now and writes contemporary romance, and that's sort of
Yes.
how I ended up at the publisher I'm at, Harpeth Road, because I started reading Jenny's books a long time ago, like 10 plus years
Mhm,
ago. And as a journalist, I sometimes write about books, and her
mhm,
books were ones that I had included in some roundups that I had done. I'm a huge Hallmark fan, and so I
mhm.
write about Hallmark movies for AARP, and I've written for Pop Sugar
That's
and a few other
awesome.
places. And so I remember talking to Jenny about one of her books that became a Christmas movie.
Mm-hmm.
And she was just one of those authors that was an auto buy for me every time she had a new book. And now I don't have
Mm-hmm.
to buy her books. Now she sends me advanced copies now that I'm an author at her publishing company,
That's
Harpeth Road.
awesome.
So that was such a full circle moment to
Mm-hmm.
end up publishing my book with her. And it's been such a wonderful experience. And that has also brought me into contact with several other authors I love, like Terry Wilson and Nancy
Yes.
Nagel, who are
Yep.
also both publishing at Harpeth Road. They were also authors I had written about back before I was a published
Yeah.
fiction author. And now I got to go on a little mini book tour with Nancy this summer
That's
because we had
awesome.
books that came out a week apart. And it has truly been such a magical experience to go from reading and writing about those authors to being published in the same place. And like Terry
Mm.
blurbed my book, and then Nancy and I were on a book tour together. And I'm saying it out loud and it still doesn't feel real.
Oh, that's awesome. And yes, they're all fantastic authors too. I love their work too. Genuinely nice people. I have not met Nancy or Terry in person or Jenny. I have met Jenny before, but virtually. She was on the podcast last year and very sweet, very kind.
They are all
So fun
just
to
the
talk to.
nicest people. Nancy and I went on tour with another Harpeth Road author who's newer, like I am, Lindsay
Mm-hmm.
Gibson. And the
Yes,
three of us had so much fun together, not only doing the bookstore signings, but just like being together. We all got a condo together in Savannah for our book signing there. So we
that's
were all
awesome.
staying together and we were like instant best friends. They're the
Oh.
nicest people. And it's so much fun to have author friends after like
Mm-hmm.
being a voracious reader and then writing about books and now to like be among them, it just doesn't feel real.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I actually feel the same way about podcasting. Like I have a bunch of podcast friends, and when we get together, it's so fun
It is.
to
I know
just
when you
talk
get
and hang
that,
out.
you make those virtual connections and then you
Yeah.
actually get to meet in person. It's so much fun.
What is your writing process? Do you first come up with a storyline and then build your characters, or do you have a type of character in mind and then create a story for that character?
I would say most of the time I have a story and then I start figuring out who are the characters that fit in that story because the first book I wrote, which is the one coming out May of 2025, that came from years of listening to
Wow.
the Miranda Lambert song, The House That Built Me, and
Love that
thinking
song.
about like the rest of the story. Like I remember
Yeah.
thinking, okay, my interpretation of that song is you've got this woman who's come back to her childhood home
Hmm.
and being there makes her realize her life has sort of gotten off course and
Hmm.
like how does she get back to the person she was when she lived
Yeah.
in that house. And I kept asking myself like, who is she? What has happened?
Hmm.
Like why is her life like a little off course now? And
Hmm.
I'm not joking when I say I probably thought about that song for 10 years. And then I
Wow.
woke up one morning and I don't know if I had a dream or what happened, but I woke up and it was like the story was there and I knew who she was and I knew the problem
Wow.
she was having. And I started writing it that day. Now, it took me like 2 years to write it after that.
Yeah.
But that really came from the song. And funny enough, not intentionally, but a book that I'm working on right now came
Hmm.
from another Miranda Lambert song, Carousel, which when that album came out a couple of years ago, I just kept listening to Carousel on repeat. And same thing, I kept asking myself, the woman in this story, because so many songs
Hmm.
tell stories, I kept asking myself, like, who is she? And like, how can I turn her into a character? And
Yeah.
so I will end up having two books that are based on Miranda Lambert songs. So now I've just got to arrange meeting Miranda Lambert or getting my books in front of her. But you know, I find that really inspiring. And then my debut really came from going to a little free library and getting the idea from this little free library I went to. So I think most of
That's
mine
awesome.
come from some sort of story, and then I start figuring out who are the characters in that
Oh,
story.
that's awesome. Maybe I should start a petition for you to meet Miranda because she's
I
great.
know, right? Oh, love her music so much.
Yes. And The House That Built Me is one of my favorite songs by hers. I think it's one of her best.
What's nuts is that I looked up who wrote that song because originally I was going to try to get permission to use some of the lyrics, which is
Hmm.
so hard to do. But I looked up the
Yes.
songwriters and it was two gentlemen. And I went to a very small undergrad. I went to Oglethorpe University in Atlanta,
I've heard
which
of
only
that.
has like a little over 1,000 students. It is very
Wow.
small. And one of the songwriters on The House That Built Me is also an Oglethorpe grad. So I've
That's
been working
amazing.
my connections, and it sounds like somebody's going to get that book when it comes out in May to the songwriter, and then maybe he can help me
Maybe.
get it.
Yeah.
Miranda, I tag her
Yes.
on social media all the time, so maybe she'll cave and answer me at some point.
Maybe. Fingers crossed.
Yes.
What do you enjoy most about writing romantic fiction, and what have you found to be the most challenging about writing in this genre?
I love writing it because I love the creativity side of it. I write nonfiction too, and that's so
Mhm,
fact based. And I'm a journalist and I write these nonfiction sports books, and there's like a right and a wrong answer.
mhm,
And I enjoy writing romance because I get to make it all up as I go, and there's not
mhm,
necessarily a right and a wrong answer. And so I
yeah,
enjoy the creativity, and it's helpful for me to sort of switch back and forth between
mhm,
the sports side of my work and the romance side, because then I never get tired of writing because they're
mhm,
so incredibly different. But it's also what makes it hard. I thought when I was first switching, or not switching, but going from writing
mhm,
nonfiction books to writing my first novel, that writing a novel was going to be so much easier because you could just make it up. Whereas my nonfiction books, I did so much research. I mean, I had mounds of books and legal journal articles and all kinds of stuff
mhm,
I had read as source material for those books. And there was a right and wrong answer, and you were afraid when the book that came out that somebody would read it and be like, no, that's wrong, you missed that. And that is
mhm,
so stressful to me with nonfiction. And I thought, well, fiction will be easy because I make it all up and it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to
mhm.
email me and tell me I got something wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, fiction's so much harder because nonfiction, there is a right and a wrong answer you can
Yes.
get to. And in
Yeah.
fiction, yes, you get to make it all up, but you have to develop the characters. They have to have an arc. They have to
Mhm,
learn something. They have to have believable backstories that give them these sorts of like scars and misbeliefs
mhm,
that you're going to sort of attack throughout the course of the story. Yes, you get to make it all up, but there's so many elements to it that I found challenging, and that required
mhm,
reading a lot of craft books, taking classes. Like those were things I did not have to do for nonfiction
mhm.
that I had to spend a lot of time doing for fiction, which is why I started writing fiction in my early to mid 20s, and my first novel didn't come out until I was 42 because that's how long it took me to get
Yeah.
good at it, versus
Mhm,
nonfiction, which I
mhm.
was good at like almost right away because it's so different.
Yeah, I can imagine how hard it is. I mean, just being a fan fiction writer occasionally for Hallmark shows, it's difficult. It's
It
very difficult.
is. But I find TV and movies help. Like it's funny, I'll see
Yes.
writers who will talk on social media about how like, they don't watch TV, and they say it like
Mhm,
it's a badge of honor that they like, don't waste their time watching television. I
mhm,
do not find watching television or movies to be a waste of my time at all. And in fact, I just saved a couple of
mhm.
podcasts to listen to on a drive I have in a couple of days that are screenwriters talking about sort of their process, because
Yeah.
they're storytellers in the same way that novelists are, and
Mhm.
they're trying to hit some of the same beats we're
Yeah.
trying to hit as writers. Like I learn things all the time from watching TV and movies about
Mhm,
how to develop my characters and make them
mhm,
realistic, and how to give something a pace that keeps people engaged. So I
mhm.
love like also writing about Hallmark movies
Yeah.
and TV shows.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to write
It
about
is.
my favorite shows on Hallmark. And with my fan fiction, I try to just, fill in the blanks where we don't know what the story is.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I find myself drawing on it because when I start writing a book, I will cast in my mind like who the
Mhm.
actor and actress would be. And I
That's
almost
awesome.
always choose Hallmark actors and actresses, and it helps me to picture them and to have
Yeah.
sort of the dialogue and
Mhm.
whatever. And, I take little seeds like in the Library of Second Chances, Logan, the main character, I
Mhm.
would want him played by Brennan Elliott. And I thought about Cedar Cove and the developer that he played there, because Logan in my book is a developer. And, the developer that he played in Cedar Cove had like no redeeming qualities. Like he was just mostly a bad guy the entire series. And I didn't want my character to be like that. My character, I needed to be able to redeem. He needed to be a good guy.
Yeah.
I wanted my female main character to fall in love with him and for the audience to want them to be together. And
Yeah.
so it's like I started with this little seed of this Hallmark character that kind of inspired my character. And then I made him so totally different, completely different backstory. And
Yeah.
now, if you looked at the two side by side, the only thing they have in common is that they're both developers. Like, I really, when I started developing that character, I thought a lot about that character he played on Cedar Cove and then just kept tweaking it.
That's awesome. I actually just recently had Brennan on the podcast. Such a nice guy and so talented.
He is. I would
Fantastic
love for
actor.
him to play
Yeah.
Logan in
Me
a
too.
in a movie
Me too.
adaptation of The Library of Second Chances, and I have told him that on social media.
Me too. That's amazing. You mentioned screenwriters. Have you ever thought about getting into screenwriting yourself?
I have. I've taken a few screenwriting classes, and they have made me realize that I do not have the time to learn how to be a screenwriter right now. Like, I think
Yeah.
it's maybe something I would enjoy learning how to do down the road. But next year, I think I'm going to have 3 books coming out between fiction and
Wow.
nonfiction. And so I am not in a place where I'm bad about overcommitting myself. And I know that I cannot commit myself to
Mhm.
screenwriting. However, I have been having meetings with a friend of mine who is a screenwriter about how
Okay.
to package and present the Library of Second Chances to production companies who would hire their own writer to turn it
Oh,
into a
that's
movie. And so I'm actually going to be spending, I've got a little solo vacation coming up, and I'm going to be spending that working on a proposal and a slide deck that my screenwriter friend has been helping me put together so that I can maybe get the Library of Second Chances optioned for a movie.
that is amazing. And I hope it works out. So fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. I'm so excited.
So let's talk about your debut novel, The Library of Second Chances. Without giving anything away, what was the inspiration behind the story and these characters? And what were the challenges of getting this first book published?
So I mentioned before, I got the idea from a little free library. I love little free
Mm-hmm.
libraries, and I have a
Yeah.
lot in my little small town. And during the pandemic, I was going to little free libraries, and one of the ones that I went to, they had people fill out a little card and put it inside the book, and you just put the date that you were dropping
Mm-hmm.
the book off. I think that was so they could keep the books in there fresh. But I got to thinking, like, what if you put a little more on the card? Like, what if you
Mm-hmm.
told other people, like, here's why you would love this book, or if you like
Mm-hmm.
this kind of book, you're gonna love this book, because
Yes.
sometimes I open little free libraries and I look and I don't recognize any of the titles
Mm-hmm.
or the authors. And that's not a bad thing. There's
No.
so many great books out there, but
Yeah.
like, I'll read the back cover copy, but I would love for somebody else to tell me why they enjoyed it. And so I started playing around with that idea in my head, and I was like, well, what if they did that and these two people started sort of connecting over the
Mm-hmm.
books they were putting in the box, and they started like leaving books for each other. And then I started thinking, well, it'd be even more fun if they didn't know each other, and they were signing it with, like, some sort of anonymous pen names like Sleepless in Seattle. Because I'm in my 40s, I'm a big 90s rom-com person. So then I
Yeah.
started thinking about You've Got Mail, which is probably my all-time favorite
Love that
90s.
movie.
Love Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan together. And I thought, what if they start falling for each other because of these notes in these books they're leaving for each
Mm-hmm.
other in the little free library, but they hate each other in real life? And what happens?
Oh.
They find out. And so it sort of started from that idea around the little free library. And then it was like, okay, who are these two people? Why don't they like each other in real life? And it does deviate from You've Got Mail. He's not trying to put her out of
Mm-hmm.
business. I know a lot of people,
That's good. Yeah.
especially younger people, that I talk to, do not like that about You've Got Mail. It does not have that. So no worries if
Oh,
that bothers you about the movie.
no.
But that's an example of where I started with the story, and then I was like, okay, who are these people? And started building out these characters who are fighting over development in this small town, but they're falling in love with each other through the books in a little free library.
I really love that concept.
Thank you. I now,
Of
every time I
course.
go to a little free library, like, that's what I think about. And I leave my book in a lot of little free libraries. And I had
Mhm.
these fun little cards made up that are like the cards in the book, that where my character is writing to somebody saying why they would enjoy this book.
Mhm.
And I slip that in the book before I put it in the little free library. And a wonderful friend of mine who's more creative than I am came up with that.
Oh, that's amazing. And it actually reminds me a little bit of in Chesapeake Shores, in some of the episodes, they had the mailbox or something with all the books, and people would
They
go to
did.
town
Yeah.
and grab the books from the
So it's funny you noticed that because Lucy, like I said, Logan really came from Brendan
Yes.
Elliott's character. Lucy very much came from Amelia Ullerup's character on Chesapeake Shores.
Oh, that's amazing.
My Lucy's a bookstore owner, much like that character Bree ended up being on Chesapeake
Yes.
Shores. And she starts by keeping up a little free library before she ends up running the bookstore. And so she's who I pictured playing Lucy. And other than that, Lucy's backstory and sort of the things that are going on in her life are really different than Bree's character on Chesapeake Shores, but she was the
Hmm.
initial inspiration for Lucy. So that's funny that you thought about Chesapeake Shores too.
That's amazing. I was actually going to ask if the book was turned into a Hallmark movie, who would you like to see as the characters? And I think
Yes,
Brennan,
Brendan and Amelia. Yep.
Amelia are fantastic. Yes.
I knew instantly when I started writing the characters that that's who they
Yes.
were. It's funny because I'm writing a book right now and I keep swapping who plays the male character. Like he's somebody for a
Yes.
little while and then I'm like, no, really, this person would play him better. But in the Library of Second Chances, I knew from day one who those characters were going to be.
That's amazing. So another interesting concept, it was actually a Hallmark movie earlier this year, Blind Date Book Club with Aaron Krakow. Love that movie.
It was a great one. I've watched it twice already and I think I still have it saved on my DVR. I loved that one.
It was so cute. And I loved the concept of that too, where she wraps the books up and you don't know what you're getting until you
Yes.
open it.
Which honestly, like as a consumer, as a reader, I've seen those in a couple of bookstores and
Mhm.
I can't do it. Like I want to do it. I want to believe that I would get it and it would be something
Yes.
unexpected that I would love. And like something, I don't know, I hesitate and I've never actually bought one of them, but I should push myself out of my comfort zone and try one.
I should too. That would be great. How did you choose the title for this book and what significance does it hold for you?
Okay, so I won't lie. Jenny chose the title for this book.
That's amazing.
We went through so many titles. My original title for this book was Summer by the Book.
Okay.
And it went through a lot of iterations. And in fact, it had another title for months before we changed it again. And then Jenny one day shot me some ideas, and the Library of Second Chances was on there. And I was like, that's it. That's the book title because Logan needs a second chance in his career. Lucy
Mhm.
needs a second chance in love. The Little Free Library is really a second chance for library books in the town because their main
Mhm.
library has been closed, and this Little Free Library is all the town
Mhm.
has. And so when she said that, I was like, that's the Little Free Library, Lucy Logan, it's everybody's story. It's all about second chances. So
Mhm.
I loved it, but all the credit goes to Jenny. It was her idea.
Oh, props to Jenny because I love the
That's why
title
she's
too.
good at what she does. That's why she's the
Yes.
publisher and I'm not.
Oh, fantastic title. And I can't wait to dive into your novel.
Thank you.
Of course. Is there a character from this story that is your favorite or that you relate to the most?
Ooh, that's really hard. People
Yeah.
always ask, like, are you like Lucy? And actually, I'm not. I'm nothing like Lucy. I think the first, as an author, the first book you write is usually the most autobiographical, and that one is like in a drawer somewhere that no one's ever going to see because my agent hated the male character. So that
Oh.
one was most like me. Lucy's nothing like me at all. Although I love her, I love all the characters that I
Mhm.
create. But I think probably I loved Lucy and Logan both pretty equally. But I think the most fun was I gave one of the characters who is a retired zoologist a pet alligator. For anyone who's watched Heart of
Okay.
Dixie, which is one of my favorite shows of all time, I loved that one of the characters in Heart of Dixie had this alligator, Burt Reynolds, and it was just so ridiculous. But I
That's
live in
awesome.
Florida and I live on an island with a bunch of
Yeah.
alligators. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun if somebody had a pet alligator? But that's so ridiculous. So I thought, okay, I'm going to have this retired zoologist, and she is going to have like baby alligators that can't be in the
Mhm.
wild, that like she uses for education. And then they go to live at like St. Augustine Alligator Farm that we have here or whatever. Like she's just going to have these small alligators she uses for educational purposes. So we have Sydney, the alligator. And in fact, in the Little Free Library, Sydney the alligator gets referred to with one of the books that a child leaves in there. And Sydney shows up in a few mentions in the book. And I just thought that was so much fun to put in
Oh,
there. And in fact, I've been working on a
yes.
social media post to introduce everybody to Sydney the alligator.
Oh, I would love to see that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
What was the most rewarding experience that you experienced during the writing process of the Library of Second Chances? And what was the most challenging scene for you to write?
Oh, the most rewarding is probably just finishing it. It's so
Finishing
hard to
it,
finish a book.
yes.
Like for me, I find it's really easy to start a book. I can't tell you how many books I have that I've got about 20,000 words of on my computer right now. And I get to that 20,000 word mark and sometimes just isn't working. And I can't go past that, that either the story has sort of fizzled out or my passion for it has fizzled out. And so finishing, I think, is always the most rewarding
Yeah.
part. And that was the second novel I ever finished. And it was I wrote it much faster than my first
Wow.
one. And I felt more confident than I did when I was writing that first one. So definitely kind of hitting the end was the most rewarding part. But as far as the most challenging, I did a huge rewrite on this book. So I
Wow.
finished it in January of 2021. I showed it to my
Wow.
literary agent, and she came back with notes and did not love it, and
No,
felt like it needed a lot of work. And we actually ultimately ended up parting ways. She was wonderful. I have nothing but good things to say about her, but
that's good.
we did part ways after that. And I had her notes. So I sort of knew what I needed to work on, but
Mhm.
I applied in a mentorship program called Kiss Pitch. And I did end up getting a mentor named Jessica Leppy, who she just had her debut this year as well, called Flirty Little Secret. And
That's
her book is
awesome.
also a You've Got Mail sort of retelling or inspired story, although executed very, very differently from mine. But she chose me because she had just been on submission and a lot of the publishers had passed because of a specific thing in her book. And that thing was in my book too. And she was like, look,
Mm.
publishers aren't going to like this. You have to change it. And I don't want to give away what it is because it'll give
Yeah.
away, I think, how I changed it. But I ended up having to rewrite the book from the middle all the way
Oh,
to the end. I basically had
wow.
to scrap the second half of the book and
Wow.
completely reimagine how they were going to find out each other's identities. And so that was definitely the most challenging part because I thought I had done it really well the first time, but I do have to agree it's better now. And for those of you who maybe have read it or once you listen to this podcast and hopefully read it, I released a deleted scene of how one of them first found out who the other one was in real life. That was a big change I made in the middle of the
Oh,
book.
wow.
And after the book came out, I released a deleted scene of the original way I had Logan finding out who Lucy was so that you could compare it to what ended up happening. And a lot of my newsletter subscribers wrote me back and they were like, yeah, the version in the published book is better. And I was like, okay, fine.
I can't wait to see how they find out
Yeah.
their identity when I read
Yeah,
the
I did
book.
but it's one of those things where it sounds like a small thing, like they find out in one chapter, but it changes everything after that. There's this real
Hmm.
domino effect. So having to scrap 50% of a 90,000 word book is a very painful experience that I hope to
Oh,
never have again, but I'm sure I probably will.
oh. Well, I hope you don't either, because I can't even imagine how difficult that must have been.
Hard.
Can you share a behind the scenes anecdote or interesting fact about writing this book that you may not have shared already?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if I can think of much other than
That's
sort of
okay.
the initial inspiration coming from the little free library. I would just share, it is a fake town in the book called Heron Isle, but it is very much based on Amelia Island where I live. So if any of you have ever been to Amelia Island, you will probably recognize some things in there. And I guess this is sort of a fun fact. The restaurant in the book that is the subject of much of the development talk
Okay.
and sort of the potential that this restaurant will go away in this town is very much based on a restaurant in my real town and very
That's
much based on
awesome.
an actual problem happening in my town that has been going on for
Oh my
years.
goodness.
And this restaurant in my real town really is set to close next year. And I don't think anything can be done about it at this point. So if you go back in my TikToks or my Instagrams and my reels, you can find one I did sitting in front of the restaurant where I talked about how this real restaurant inspired the story in the book. So for those of you who have ever been to Amelia Island, it's Brett's Waterway Cafe, which is
Okay.
our restaurant at the end of sort of our main street, which is Center Street. It sits out over the water. And if you didn't already know, it will not be here after 2025. So if you've been to Amelia Island and you loved Brett's, come enjoy it before it's gone, and know that the Waterway Cafe in the book was very much my ode to Brett's. I changed the owners, they're totally different. But the situation is very similar to what's happening here, unfortunately.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
I know, poor restaurant.
Poor restaurant. I've not been to Amelia Island, but I've heard it's beautiful and I would love to visit there someday.
Oh, come on down. I love it here. I grew up
Yes.
vacationing here. I came here for a week every
Oh,
summer my whole life. And my dad's been coming every summer since he was like
yeah.
11 or 12. And I moved here 12 years ago, and now my parents live here too. So it's like that, like dream vacation spot I
Uh-huh.
had growing up. And now I get to
Yeah.
live here full time, which is great.
That's awesome. Yes, I would love to visit there. I have visited a couple of cute little beach towns in Florida, but not Amelia Island yet. So fingers
Oh, well,
crossed.
got to put it next on your list.
Yes, I've been to New Smyrna Beach and then a couple of the towns on 30A. When I
Yep.
went to Florida with my mom, dad, and brother for my 30th birthday, I think it was last year, we drove through and drove down Highway 30A and we stopped in
Florida.
Seaside. Such a cute
Yes,
town.
seaside's so cute. Florida has so many cute little beach towns. So
Yes.
so far, every book I've written has had a Florida setting. They've all been fake towns, but they've all been based on real
Yeah.
towns. So my one coming out next May is also sort of based on Amelia Island, but written differently than the town I had in the Library of Second Chances. But the one I'm writing right now I live on the northeast side of Florida. The one I'm writing now is on the west coast of Florida. So
Okay.
I'm gonna move around Florida a little bit because there's a lot of cool
Yes.
beach here.
Yes. I noticed that the Library of Second Chances has also been released as an audiobook. Do you feel that this adds an interesting dimension to the story?
Yeah, I'm so glad that Harpeth Road does audiobooks too, because I listen to a
Mm-hmm.
lot of audiobooks. I will
Yeah.
listen while I'm walking my dog, while
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing my hair and makeup, when I'm driving. And I travel a lot for sort of my day job as a sports reporter. So I'm listening, going through airports and in rental cars,
Mm-hmm.
driving to little college towns. And so I was really excited to get an audiobook because I have not had an audiobook for my nonfiction, although I think I am for my nonfiction next year. So I was
That's
excited
awesome.
that Harpeth Road does that for all of our books. And then
Yeah.
Jenny let me choose my audiobook narrator from a few choices.
Aw.
And I remember listening to this one and being like, yes, that is what Lucy sounds like.
Aw.
So it was really fun. And I have the same audiobook narrator for my book next year too. So excited to work with her again.
Aw. I can't wait to check out the audiobook too, because I also think that it adds an interesting dimension as well.
It does. And it's weird as an
Yeah.
author, it's really weird to listen to the audiobook. I remember when it came out, I downloaded it to listen to, not like I don't know what my own story is, but it is so different listening to someone else say the words. And I'd
Mm-hmm.
be like, wait, did I write that? Did I say that? How did I word that?
Oh,
Like,
oh,
it
yes.
feels like a totally different book than when I'm reading it on my screen and it's the words I've written. To hear someone else bring it to life
Hmm.
and to like do a voice for Lucy and for Logan is a really like out of body experience.
I can imagine, but I'm sure that it turned out fantastic.
It did. My audiobook narrator, Melly, is so good.
What is special about this book, and what do you hope that readers take away from it?
To me, the little free library is like the best part of this book. In fact, I was
Hmm.
talking to my screenwriter friend about putting the pitch deck together
Hmm.
to pitch to movie producers, and she was like, "Do you think enough people, know what little free libraries are? Like, do you think we need to mention that part?" And I was like, "To me, that's like the heart of the whole story. Like, you
Hmm.
can't that it isn't the Library of Second Chances without the little free library. Like, that's such an
Hmm.
integral part of
Yeah,
this book."
exactly.
That to me, it's almost like its own character in the book. So I
Hmm.
think it's kind of special. And I have a kind of an idea for how to maybe have a Christmas novella next year that
That would be
involves the little
awesome.
free library. And so we'll see if I can pull that together and find the time to write it.
Fingers crossed, because I would love to read a novella with
Yeah.
another free library. That would be awesome.
The problem is really whether I can write a novella because I am a notorious overwriter. I write too many words for my first draft and then I have to cut it down. So the idea of trying to
Yeah.
write something shorter, I'm not sure I'm talented enough to pull off, but I'm going to try.
Oh, I'm sure you are. I'm sure you would do a great job. As we start to wrap up, I have a fun this or that game if you would like to play.
I would love to.
Meet your favorite author or meet your favorite character.
Oh, I think meet my favorite character. I don't even know who that would be, but that sounds like a cool
Mm,
opportunity.
that's a tough one. I can't decide. I think I said in a previous interview, meet my favorite author, but I think this time I'll change it up and I'll say meet your favorite character.
I think too, because
And
I've
I,
met a lot of my favorite authors. That doesn't sound as enticing because I'm so lucky that I've already gotten to do that. So I think meet my favorite character, but then trying to narrow down who my favorite character is, like in
that's
someone else's
difficult.
book, there's a long list.
Yes, there's a long list for me too. I think at the top of my list, though, it would be Elizabeth Thatcher slash Thornton from When Calls the Heart.
That's a good choice.
Unlimited free books or live inside your favorite book.
Unlimited free books. I want to
That's
go
a
to
good
different
one.
worlds.
Yes. I think I would have to say live inside my favorite book. Probably When Calls the Heart.
Yeah.
Live on the
Oh,
frontier.
you're a super fan.
Yes, I am. I actually love the historical romance like that set in the 1900s. Times were simpler, and if I could go back in time, I would probably pick that time period.
Yeah, makes sense.
Enemies to lovers or friends to lovers?
Enemies to lovers. It's my favorite to read and my favorite to write. I am writing a friends to lovers right now, and I find that so much harder because it's easy to make them hate each other and it's easy to have that like banter back and forth. It's harder to
Mhm.
have a friendship and try to evolve it into a relationship. So definitely enemies to lovers.
Yeah, they're both fantastic. I know I have heard that enemies to lovers can sometimes be difficult, but I can see how friends to lovers would be difficult too. But they're both great.
Yes.
Movie based on a book or show based on a book?
Ooh, show based on a book because then you get more. Hopefully you get like
Oh,
multiple seasons and it goes on and on.
yeah, I think I would have to say that too. Favorite book as a film or favorite book as a TV series?
Yeah, probably favorite book as a TV series. Same thing. I'd rather have more of it. I feel like you get more if it's a series.
Yeah, I think I said that in a previous interview. TV series, When Called to Heart.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of other great books too. One of my favorite books turned into a movie, I think, is Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants.
So good. So good. Have you read Annie Rain's book, The Charmed Friends of Trovile? I think I got the title
I
right.
have not. I'll have to
Read it
check it
because
out.
it is like Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, except with a charm bracelet instead of jeans. If you love Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, you have to read that book. And
I'm sure
Annie,
I will.
again, one of those authors I love so much who ended up blurbing my debut novel, which I was so grateful for, just the nicest, sweetest person. And I think it's called The Charmed Friends of Trovile. So good.
Okay. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
And I think also that's why the Wedding Veil series is so popular on Hallmark because
Yes.
that's also like Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, but with the wedding veil.
Yes, I loved that series.
I did too. Yes. Fiction or nonfiction?
Oh, I don't know. Am I reading it or writing it?
Either.
Writing. It's hard to say because my life is like half and half. I write
Yeah,
nonfiction about half the time and I write fiction about half the time and I love them both. I don't think I could choose. But
that's
reading
okay.
fiction, I do read some nonfiction,
Hmm.
especially memoir, and I love celebrity
Hmm.
memoirs. I'm getting ready to
Yes.
start Kelly Bishop's because I love Gilmore Girls. So I'm getting
Oh,
ready for the
love,
third Gilmore Girl. Cannot
love
wait.
Gilmore Girls.
But generally speaking, I read a lot more fiction.
Yes, me too. I think I'm the same way. But I do have a couple of celebrity memoirs. Like one of my favorites is Chip and Joanna Gaines, the Magnolia
Oh,
story.
I have not read it. I need to add that to
It's
my list
great.
too.
It's been a couple years since I've read it, but it's great. You should definitely check it out. Physical book or ebook?
Ebook. I'm an ebook person, which I don't think is necessarily a popular answer, but it's because I travel
Okay.
so much. So I
Mm-hmm.
need it to be on my Kindle. I overpack as it is. I do not have room for multiple
Mm-hmm.
books. So it's got to be on my Kindle for me. Now I will then go buy the physical book as a shelf trophy. As you can see behind me on my bookshelf, almost all of these I either listened to or read on my Kindle, and then I bought the shelf trophy.
I have a ton of books. That is my bookshelf right there.
Yep.
I am running out of room on my bookshelf. I have to get
They're all
another
over
one.
my house. But we have hundreds of books in that. My husband has a lot of books too. We have bookshelves everywhere.
Oh my
But most of
goodness.
mine, I'd never even have cracked open the book because I either listened to the audiobook or I read the Kindle version.
Understandable. I think for me, I would say the physical book, but ebooks are great too. I'm just one of those people that loves the hard copy in their hand.
Yeah.
Even with magazines or DVDs or CDs, I'm like, I want to have a hard copy in my
Yeah.
hand
I get that.
or on my DVD shelf.
I do still have a lot of DVDs. My husband tries to get me to get rid of
Oh,
them all the time. I have two bookshelves of DVDs downstairs, and he's constantly begging me to get rid of them, and I won't do it.
standalone or series?
I read a lot more standalones. I know series are popular with people,
Mhm.
but I don't have patience to wait for the next book. So if I'm going to read a series, I wait till the whole thing is
The
out and
whole
then
thing
I'll
is
read it.
out. Yeah.
But I prefer standalones. I like to jump around. But I am going to attempt to write a series of my own. So we'll see how I feel
That
after
would
I
be
do that.
amazing. Yes. I think I would pick standalone too. I was actually talking about this with my author friend Rachel Fordham, and I think we said the same thing.
Yeah.
Standalone, unless, a series has already completely come out.
Yeah.
Because it's hard waiting. I mean, when you're,
Well, then it's hard to remember what happened. It's like I have to go back and read the book
yeah,
again, or I have to like go find a summary so I can remember what
yes.
happened to the different characters. It's hard.
As we wind down the interview, I have a segment on the podcast where I ask my guest to share an inspiring quote or piece of advice. Do you have an inspiring quote or piece of advice you would like to share?
I do. I've had a quote that's been my go-to for many, many, many years now. And I don't know who said it or if it got like adapted from something. I've tried looking it up and I can't find the exact quote anywhere. So I don't know if I just heard somebody say it in a speech and it's not written down anywhere, but it talks about you can't just wait for opportunity to knock. Sometimes you have to take the door off the hinges and
Mm,
tackle opportunity in
that's
the
great.
street. And I am a
Yeah.
big believer in that in like all aspects of
Yeah.
my different careers I've had, from being a corporate attorney to being a
Yeah.
sports business reporter to, now being an author. You have to be willing to put yourself out there for things and you have to be willing
Mm-hmm.
to ask for things. And the worst thing somebody can do is say no. And,
Mm-hmm.
nothing, lost, nothing gained. And I know Nora Roberts has a really good quote
Mm-hmm.
about if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And that's
Mm-hmm.
true. So both of those are quotes that I use all the time.
That's fantastic. Yes, that's a great quote and something I think everyone should take to heart. Well, this was so much fun, Savannah. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on and chat with me about your debut novel. I cannot wait to read it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love the podcast, and it was on my wish
Oh,
list
thank
of
you.
podcasts I wanted to be on. So thank you for making my author
Aw.
dreams come true.
Of course, it's my pleasure. And where can my listeners follow you on social media?
I am at Savvy Carlisle. So two V's, SAVVY Carlisle on all the different social media networks. I use the same username everywhere. And then
Okay.
my website's savannahcarlisle.com.
All right, everyone, make sure to go follow her on all social media platforms because she is great.
Thank you.
Of course. All right, everyone. I think this wraps up my interview with Savannah Carlisle. If you enjoyed this episode and are watching on YouTube, you can like this video and share your thoughts about the Library of Second Chances in the comments. If you are listening on Spotify, make sure to rate and review, as your feedback is always greatly appreciated. If you want to stay up to date on all of my episodes, you can subscribe to this channel or follow along on Spotify, and make sure to turn on the bell so you're alerted when new episodes come. You can also find the podcast on Instagram at Swing My Heart Podcast and Twitter at Swing My Heart Pod. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are in the world, and I will see you next time. Love y'all. Bye.